Hi everyone, my name is Ben. Today we're going to be going through Animal Farm Chapter 1, doing some analysis, understanding the world that Orwell sets up straight away. Hopefully this will be useful for your studies at GCSE level, no matter what curriculum you're studying with. If you're doing Animal Farm, this should be helpful. For now, we're just explaining and analysing the text itself. Okay, so this will hopefully improve your knowledge of the text, your understanding of the text, and the techniques used by Orwell, the context he's referring to, all that good stuff. Obviously, there will be spoilers. That's a given. But with that being said, let's get straight into it. In this session, we're going to be looking at these three things. So how Orwell builds his world. When authors begin a story, they build the world in the first chapter. How does Orwell do that? What is it based on? What are the contexts? Also, some character introductions. Secondly, Old Major's speech. This takes up the bulk of the chapter. So we're going to be looking at how that influences the rest of the text, its importance in this chapter, and some key quotes from that. And then finally, the Beasts of England song. This is what Old Major uses to conclude his speech. And that is also a very relevant song, or relevant performance, shall we say, for the entirety of the novel. Something that is representative of rebellion. So we'll be talking about that a lot as we go through the chapters of the book. So world building and context. There are a few things I want to clear up here. A few complicated terms that are used and that you'll hear being used a lot in political commentary texts like Animal Farm. First and foremost, Mr. Jones is seemingly representative of Tsar Nicholas II. Now, the Tsar system in Russia was the government system, basically, before the likes of Stalin came to power, before the revolution. And Nicholas II was the last one of this format of leadership. He ruled as the Emperor of Russia from 1894, as he was forced to abdicate in 1917 during the February Revolution. So that is important to note. But the main thing I want to talk about here is this: autocracies versus dictatorships. Now, there is a difference between the two, albeit a small one. You'll often hear these terms alongside other terms like authoritarianism, totalitarianism. Again, these are common phrases, common terms thrown around when we're dealing with political commentary, especially of oppressive regimes like the Soviet Union. But it's important to understand the differences. So, first and foremost, an autocracy. This is where one person / group has the power with very little or no legal limits. Examples of this would be the Spanish monarchs of the 16th to 17th centuries. Generally speaking, most monarchs, modern times, and modern day Saudi Arabia is another example. Basically, any country or place where the government tends to be able to stay in power and do as pretty much as they please with very little repercussions or restrictions on this. Dictatorships, however, are more totalitarian, right? They're more oppressive. So it's one person or small group again, where they have absolute power, usually gained and or maintained through violence and extreme oppression. These are the classics: the Nazi Germany, North Korea, or in the case of Animal Farm, the Soviet Union and Stalin. So dictatorship, neither of these are nice, but dictatorships tend to be a little bit more total, a little bit more harsh. Then these two phrases, authoritarianism and totalitarianism, get thrown about a lot. The only reason I'm basically dissecting all the differences between these is because I know it was very confusing for me when I was learning this. They all seem so similar, they all seem to get thrown around so loosely, and for the most part you kind of can use them interchangeably, but it's important to know that autocracies and dictatorships with authoritarianism and totalitarianism, that's like comparing apples and oranges. They're not the same thing. Autocracies and dictatorships are the same line of idea. It's the government, the system. Authoritarianism and totalitarianism are the degrees of control that an autocracy or a dictatorship has. They are the degrees of control within it. So let's look at the differences between these. So authoritarianism, once again, slightly less harsh. They suppress political opposition, but they allow some social or economic or religious freedom. Okay, so you definitely can't oppose the political leader or party, absolutely no way, but they might be kind enough to let you listen to your favourite artist or let you watch your favourite football team. But yeah, it's about some level of freedom. Totalitarianism is total control over public and private life. Now, in most cases, in lots of cases, regimes, systems, governments, they go from a place of authoritarianism to totalitarianism. They become totalitarian because that's the natural progression, right? You want more control. This isn't always, but, lots of examples, especially Animal Farm, we can see how it kind of goes from authoritarianism into that sort of totalitarian aspect. Everything is controlled. And then we've also got a diagram to demonstrate it, hopefully in a little less complex way than I just did. But a political system, autocracy, dictatorship, and they can operate with these degrees of control: authoritarianism, totalitarianism. That is that for the context. Now, character introductions. The first thing we get hit with in the text are the seating arrangements. The seating arrangements are really important, even though they seem quite meaningless when you first read it. They kind of set up, or they give you an inkling of where this story is going to go. The first thing to notice is that the dogs and pigs sit closest and they come in first. Okay? This already implies some level of superiority for these animals, right? They are the most important. They are the priority. They sit closest to Old Major and they come in first. On that same line of thinking, the sheep and the cows, they sit behind the pigs. Once again, reiterating this idea of hierarchy, which is already present, even despite all the animals being under the regime of Mr. Jones. And that's like any normal society, right? It's no different for these animals. The sheep and cows are behind the pigs. The sheep in particular, we see throughout the text, are particularly stupid, particularly unintelligent. And then we have Boxer and Clover, who set their hooves with great care. These are two of the horses. Boxer in particular is one of the most important characters in the text. He's described, which we'll come on to in a second, as incredibly strong and a hard worker. Now, the idea that they both set their hooves with great care, they don't have to do that. They're big animals. Boxer is basically stronger than any other animal on the farm, stronger than animals combined. That's how he's described. But he still sets his hoof with great care. There's an element of morality and goodness to these characters, which we will later see kind of disables them from being able to recognize rebellion and act on rebellion. That alongside with their lack of intelligence. There's a picture of Boxer, quite blurry, so apologies, but that gives you an idea. Strong guy. Enormous beast, strong as any two ordinary horses put together. Those are the quotes to describe his strength. But then we also get that he's not of first-rate intelligence, which is really interesting. So despite his strength, intellectually, he's not all there, which becomes a really important thing to be aware of. Intelligence is a big theme in this first chapter. He's also universally respected for his ... which is a continuation of a longer quote, powers of work. Again, spoilers, of course, but ironically, what we see is that Boxer, being such a hard worker, actually perpetuates the control of the pigs, because everyone follows suit to Boxer. But because Boxer's not intelligent enough to recognize what's going on, it means he doesn't rebel. And if Boxer doesn't rebel and he carries on working, all the other animals follow suit. So it's kind of like a vicious circle. Then we have Clover. There's not much of a description for her in the first chapter, other than that she's motherly. She's also unintelligent, which means despite feeling as though the farm is not in a good state, despite overthrowing Mr. Jones, when Napoleon comes to power, she still feels like it is not what they signed up for, but she can't express it properly because she's not intelligent enough. And then we have Benjamin, who is a cynical donkey. There you go. Oldest, worst-tempered, seldom talked as well. These horses all kind of represent different groups of society. Orwell does this intentionally. Boxer is very much the working class man. Clover, the working class women. Benjamin, the more intellectual people who don't stand up for whatever reason, whether that's because they are scared to, because they can't be bothered, or because they lack the bravery, right? Whatever it might be, Benjamin kind of represents that. He is intelligent, he can read, but he doesn't think it's important to call out what he sees, right? He kind of sees it for what it is. on the farm, but he doesn't really let anyone else in on that, which kind of comes back to bite him when, spoiler alert, they take Boxer away to the glue factory. Two more characters. Molly kind of represents the sort of materialistic, selfish middle class that's able to, or that was able to, escape the Soviet Union or live in the Soviet Union but comfortably, because they have the financial freedom, the social freedom to live as they please. She's described as foolish, and we see her chewing at a lump of sugar and flirting her white mane. Then we have Old Major. He's kind of the main character for one chapter of the whole book, which is in chapter 1, because this whole chapter is about him and his speech and his dream. He is basically a representative of the original founders of what we know as Marxism, or the Communist Manifesto, namely Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which I'm sure you've heard about. But if you haven't, look them up. These guys had their own thoughts, which are emulated through Old Major's character, through Old Major's speech. And he's described as wise and benevolent. That's very clear. Even in the name Old Major, we get this idea that he's very wise. But the really interesting quote isn't actually directly about him. It's about everyone, all the other animals' perceptions of him, which is everyone was quite ready to lose an hour's sleep in order to hear what he had to say. This gives him importance. He's respected. He's believed in. That takes on to Old Major's speech. This is the bulk of the chapter. It's extremely important. I've taken some quotes that I think are particularly relevant and important to talk about. There'll be plenty of others that you can find, but for the most part, these ones are standouts to me. There's a picture of Old Major looking particularly unattractive from the film. So, comrades. This is a repetition. He uses comrades a lot. The animals persist with that phrase. They all use comrades for quite the majority of the book until a certain someone bans it. And it's a repetition of a unifying term. You know, when we hear the word comrades, you think friend, partner, equal, right? It's a benevolent term. It's a kind, friendly term. The reason this is important because at the start it means everything. It means equality. It's a symbol of how all animals are equal and should prosper in the face of human beings. But as the text continues, you can quite clearly see that these comrades, or the phrase comrades, is being used to manipulate the animals, to keep them in check, to keep them under the illusion that they are all equal, when really that's not quite the case. So comrades is very important. We then have these two quotes here. Our lives are miserable, laborious, and short, and the produce of our labour is stolen from us by human beings. These two quotes are very much reflections of what was in the Communist Manifesto. The idea that the bourgeoisie would exploit and abuse the proletariat, or the working class. They would use them for their hard work and labour, and they would take all the money, reap all the rewards. That's kind of what the crux of Marxism really is. And then this long quote. Again, this isn't necessarily a quote that you would use the entirety of in an essay because it's quite long, and examiners don't want to see quotes that long, but it's an important passage in the speech, and you can pick stuff out as you please. We are given so much food as will keep the breath in our bodies, and those of us who are capable of it are forced to work to the last atom of our strength. In the very instant that our usefulness has come to an end, we are slaughtered with hideous cruelty. This is one big passage of foreshadowing. Foreshadowing, for those of you who don't know, essentially is subtly predicting or subtly telling you what will happen, or giving you an idea of what is going to happen in a text. This foreshadowing isn't so obvious, because at the start, you're kind of just focused on this emotive speech from Old Major. But when you read it back, you can see the foreshadowing, because everything he says the humans are doing, Napoleon does by the end of the text. They barely have any food by the end of the text, or the end of the story. They are all forced to work to the last atom of their strength, and once again, spoiler, when Boxer's usefulness comes to an end, he is indeed taken away and slaughtered. So this is foreshadowing to a large extent because it happens regardless of who's in charge, whether it's Mr. Jones or whether it's Napoleon. Then we have some more quotes. You, Boxer, the very day that those great muscles of yours lose their power, Jones will sell you to the knacker. More foreshadowing, more obvious foreshadowing this time, because this is still what happens. It's inevitable. It's unavoidable. It's the vicious cycle of life. This one is really interesting, really important. All men are enemies. All animals are comrades. This is definitely a quote I would make sure to remember for my exam. This is what we call absolutist language or absolute language. That's basically when there's no room for nuance. Nuance is subtle differences between ideas, between words, between phrases. An example of nuance can be found in synonyms, right? I'm sure every one of you has looked up synonyms for words when you're trying to find a better word for something, whatever it might be. But the reason they are synonyms is because they are similar, not the exact same. An example of this would be if you searched up synonyms for wet, and one of the words that came up is soaked. These are similar. They are talking about when you are damp, when liquid has gone onto something, right? But they're not the same. Wetness is, a little bit more tame. You're a bit wet. It's not the end of the world. If you're soaked, you are completely drenched, right? To your skin, through your clothes. Water's gone everywhere. Liquid's gone everywhere, whatever it is. You're completely drenched. And that's a big nuance between those two words. Even though they're similar, it's a nuance. It's a small difference. This quote from Old Major leaves no room for nuance by the repetition of the word all. All men are enemies. There's not a single man who's not an enemy. Not a single human who's not an enemy. They are all enemies. All animals are comrades. There's no exception, right? That's how he talks. This is obviously going to cause some problems if the animals stand by this because, spoiler alert, there will be humans that are introduced that become close to the farm. There will be animals that are introduced that become distant and enemies from the farm. So instantly, this dream utopian system that Old Major sets up is doomed to fail because there's no nuance. All humans are enemies, all animals are comrades. Next one. Even when you have conquered him, do not adopt his vices. This is the most obvious foreshadowing so far because this is like a command that is obviously going to go awry. Him and his, in this instance, are humans. Don't do their vices. Don't do their bad habits. Don't do the things they do. This is obviously not going to be fulfilled. Then we have this quote, which is kind of links back to the all animals are comrades problem, where the animals are asked to vote whether, I think it's rats, if rats count as animals, right? Because they're these slimy little rodents. Do they count as animals? Instantly, there's a problem with Old Major's quote. All animals are comrades. What consists as an animal? What doesn't count as an animal? But we get these early indications of indecision, corruption, and uncertainty from this quote, as some of the animals vote on both sides, right? There's this idea of confusion, and it's kind of a parallel to later on when Snowball and Napoleon, again, spoiler, are going at it for leadership about the windmill, and the animals, quote, found themselves agreeing with whoever was talking at the time. Again, it's a subtle foreshadowing to the doom of this system, of this regime that will come later in the text. So, last part of the video, the Beasts of England song. As said before, this is the conclusion to Old Major's speech. And it's very important because of how it's used and weaponized in the text by Napoleon. So it's a song about rebellion, overthrowing man, and the sacrifices it will take to do this. I would say within the song, there aren't many quotable lines that I would particularly go out of my way to memorize for an exam. But just knowing what the song is about and why Orwell has used it and how Napoleon and the pigs weaponize the song until it's no longer useful to them when they ban it. Spoiler alert. That is what's important. This quote, after the song has been sung, or after Old Major has introduced it, is really important. Even the stupidest of them had already picked up the tune and a few of the words. This is coming back to the idea of intelligence once again. We talked about it with Boxer and Clover and Benjamin. Now we're talking about it to do with, or in relation to the song. This idea that the most unintelligent of the animals can understand the song means they are able to use the song, the pigs that is, as a way of unifying the animals. Kind of like the phrase comrades. It's a term for unifying for making everyone feel like they're together. They're in this together against humans, to rebel, to rule, and to live happily, equally as animals. It keeps people in check without realizing what's actually going on, which is the pigs taking almighty power. And here we go. Early displays of how the animals will later be manipulated and exploited, not just through the song, but because the animals are not intelligent enough to remember and learn information to a full extent. This lack of intelligence is the single greatest downfall that the animals have when they fall victim to Napoleon's dictatorship, to Napoleon's totalitarian rule. This is the single biggest reason for that, because they are not intelligent. They have bad memories. They can't remember what was said a month ago. So they can't be angry when they feel confused about something that might have changed, like a commandment. They can't be sure because they don't know, they don't remember. And they can't read the new commandments anyway. So they can't even really see what it says unless they go out of their way to ask, which most of them don't, because they have blind faith. Blind faith, that is, that the pigs have their best interests at heart, which they don't. So that is the single biggest flaw that lots of the animals have, is that they're not intelligent enough, because they can't rebel without intelligence. No matter how strong some of the animals might be, i.e. Boxer, because he's not intelligent, his strength doesn't really matter. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Hopefully that's been helpful, and that will be of some use to you in your understanding, your knowledge of the text. A lot of this today was sort of focusing on the world building aspect of stuff, which characters represent who, and the definitions of dictatorships versus autocracies, so on and so forth. The rest of the chapters will be much more focused on the events of the book, but chapter 1 is pretty much just Old Major's speech. So hopefully that was useful. Please subscribe to stay tuned for more videos on Animal Farm. That's the book we're starting with here on the channel. I will be going over to all the other texts that are on various curriculums, whether you're AQA, EdXL, OCR, Educast, whatever it might be. We'll look through all the big important literature texts. I'll also be looking at poems from poetry anthologies, analysis on those, and also English language as well. For now, we're going through Animal Farm chapters 1 through to 10. If you guys would like me to cover anything in particular, please feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll bump that up the list of priorities. But for now, I will see you when I upload the second chapter analysis video of Animal Farm. Bye for now.